We're going to be looking at the crash of Air France Flight 296.
The Airbus A320 that went down back in 1988.
During an air show in France.
Yeah, a really fascinating incident that gives us, a pretty unique perspective on how decisions get made.
Under pressure.
Especially when you have advanced technology involved. We're going to break down exactly what happened using the official accident report.
Going from the initial flight plan to the crew's actions and really those critical moments that led to this tragic outcome.
It should be a good one.
All right, let's set the scene. June 26, 1988, at the Mulhouse-Habsheim Airport in France.
Air France Flight 296 was a chartered flight, part of the air show.
Carrying 130 passengers and a crew of 6.
And get this, the crew included 2 captains, both instructors.
Interesting. Talk about a unique cockpit dynamic.
Yeah, and tragically this flight resulted in 3 passenger fatalities, the total destruction of the aircraft, and about 2 hectares of burned forests.
Not good.
Yeah.
So let's dig into the flight plan itself.
They were supposed to do a low-altitude flyover of the runway as a highlight of the air show.
That's cool.
But the investigation found problems with the pre-flight briefing between the crew and the air show organizers right off the bat.
So communication breakdowns right from the start.
Yeah, communication is key in aviation and, especially in a complex environment like an air show. But in this case, some crucial information about the chosen runway and safety procedures was just missing.
Red flag number 1. Did it stop there?
Not even close. During taxiing, the captain briefed the first officer on their 2 planned passes. The first was planned at 100 feet, flaps extended, landing gear down, and decelerating to the maximum angle of attack.
Now, for those who aren't pilots, can you quickly explain what the maximum angle of attack is?
Sure. So the maximum angle of attack is basically the steepest angle the aircraft can climb at before it stalls.
It's that point where the wings lose lift.
Right, and they were going to disengage the A320's alpha floor protection for this first pass.
Okay, so alpha floor is a safety feature that's meant to prevent stalls.
Exactly. And the plan was to have the first officer maintain altitude while this was going on. The second flyover was also planned at 100 feet, high speed, and clean.
Meaning no flaps or landing gear.
Yep. But here's the kicker. That planned 100-foot flyover height was actually below the French regulatory minimum of 170 feet.
So they were breaking the rules.
And it even violated Air France's own internal guidelines.
Bold move. Anything else?
Yeah, the crew didn't clearly define who was responsible for lookout and instrument monitoring during the maneuver.
So you've got this low flyover that's already below the regulated altitude, and there's confusion about who's doing what in the cockpit.
A recipe for disaster.
Okay, so they're approaching the airfield. The captain identifies the airfield visually, but it seems like this happened later than intended. He then chooses runway 34R for the flyover, which might not have been the initial plan.
Yeah, it seems like there were some deviations from the plan here again.
Highlighting how vital communication and having a shared understanding really is.
And keep in mind, this is all happening as they're descending, engines at idle, and their speed is decreasing.
Which in itself isn't unusual for a planned low flyover, I guess.
But when you combine it with everything else, it really adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah, not a lot of room for error.
Exactly. Very little margin for error. And then the radio altimeter starts going off.
The thing that measures their height above ground, right?
Right. First at 200 feet, then 100 feet, 50 feet, 40 feet. It's blaring these warnings, but the captain basically ignores them.
Wow. These warnings aren't suggestions. They're there for a reason.
They're literally designed to prevent this type of situation, so why were they ignored? Overconfidence, distraction, maybe the air show environment played a part.
Yeah, good question. I mean, it really makes you think about how we make decisions under pressure.
And it gets weirder. The first officer actually says, "Watch out for the pylons ahead."
Recognizing the danger.
Yeah, but the captain dismissed his concern.
What was going on in that cockpit? Was there a reluctance to challenge the captain's authority? I mean, we know that was a thing back then.
Whatever the reason, they kept going down.
And at this point, they leveled off at a height of approximately 30 feet.
Remember, they were aiming for 100, and the regulatory minimum was 170.
They were below the height of obstacles.
A very dangerous position. And they're still decelerating, getting closer and closer to that maximum angle of attack.
The point of no return.
They're low, slow, approaching a stall, and they have obstacles in their path.
Not good.
Not good at all. And then finally, the captain initiates a go-around, pushes the throttles forward to try and climb away from the ground.
But it's too late.
Way too late. The report says this happened only 5 to 5.5 seconds before impact.
Those last few seconds are so critical.
Absolutely. They didn't have much time to recover.
And the engines, they roared back to life, right?
Yeah, as expected. But even with that power, it just wasn't enough to avoid disaster.
I mean, it takes time for that power to translate into altitude.
Yeah, especially when you're starting from such a low speed and altitude.
So they were fighting physics at that point.
Basically.
All right, let's talk about the moment of impact, the actual crash.
Yeah, it's important to understand the severity of what happened.
Okay, so picture this. The rear of the fuselage hits the trees first, followed by the tailplane.
Then the engine nacelles, and then finally the landing gear.
They were practically skimming the tops of the trees.
And then the right wing breaks off, fuel ignites, the aircraft is engulfed in flames.
Oh, man. So the passengers then started evacuating through the left forward and aft doors.
But it was incredibly difficult because of the fire, the debris from the trees, and some damage to the escape slides.
And tragically, 3 passengers were trapped and couldn't escape the fire.
Right. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong and the human cost of those incidents.
Let's switch gears a bit and get into the investigation.
Okay.
Because this is where we can try to understand why this happened.
And hopefully learn from it. So the investigators had a lot to look at. They recovered the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder.
The black boxes.
Right. And they used those to piece together what happened leading up to the crash.
So was it a mechanical failure? Pilot error? Or something else?
Well, one of the first things they found was that the engines were working fine up to the point of impact.
So that wasn't the problem?
Nope. They also found that the flight control system was operating normally.
Including the fly-by-wire system?
Yep. Everything was working as it should within the certified standards.
Hold on, can we talk about fly-by-wire for a second, for those who don't know what that is?
Sure. So in a traditional aircraft, the pilot's controls are physically connected to the flight surfaces.
Like the steering wheel in a car.
Exactly. But in a fly-by-wire system, like on the A320, there aren't those physical connections. It's all electronic signals.
So the pilot moves the controls, and a computer tells the plane what to do.
Basically.
So it's kind of like playing a video game.
Yeah. Good analogy. And this was pretty revolutionary tech when the A320 came out. Lots of advantages. Safety, smoother handling, fuel efficiency.
But it also meant pilots needed to adapt.
For sure. And in this case, they found that the fly-by-wire system wasn't to blame. It was doing its job.
Okay, so that rules that out. What about that radio altimeter anomaly they talked about?
Right. There is a moment where it seemed like the altimeter might have gotten confused by some trees, but they concluded that it didn't contribute to the accident.
So it all points to the crew's actions then.
But it wasn't just a simple case of pilot error. This incident was a pivotal moment for understanding human factors in aviation.
So what do you mean by human factors?
Well, back in the late 1980s, there wasn't as much focus on how human psychology could affect safety as there is today. This crash really brought that to the forefront.
Okay, so what were some of those human factors in this case?
Well, the first one was the pre-flight briefing. Remember how we talked about that missing information and the unclear procedures?
Yeah.
That set them up for confusion and miscommunication later on?
Like trying to build a house without a blueprint.
Exactly. And then you've got that unclear task sharing during the flyover. It wasn't clear who was looking out for obstacles, who was on the instruments.
And distractions can be fatal.
Absolutely. And then, the big one, overconfidence. The captain was probably overconfident in his own abilities and the capabilities of the A320.
Which was a pretty new aircraft at the time.
Right, and maybe he felt like he could push the limits, especially at an air show.
And the air show environment itself, that probably played a role too.
For sure. The pressure, the excitement, the distractions, all of that affects your decision making.
The tunnel vision.
Exactly. And then there's this thing called authority gradient. The first officer maybe didn't want to question the captain even though he had concerns.
Because of the hierarchy in the cockpit.
Yeah, this was a common problem back then.
And that brings us to CRM training, right?
Yes. CRM training came about partly because of incidents like this one.
CRM stands for?
Crew resource management. It's all about those non-technical skills, communication, teamwork, stress management, decision-making, recognizing those human factors.
So before this, CRM training wasn't really a thing.
It was around, but not as widely used or as advanced as it is today.
This crash was a wake-up call.
Exactly. It showed the industry that just knowing how to fly the plane wasn't enough.
Pilots need all those other skills too.
Right, and CRM training helps them develop those skills.
So how did Flight 296 specifically change CRM training? What were those key lessons?
Well, first of all, it showed how important clear and assertive communication is. Pilots need to be able to speak up, question things, and advocate for safety no matter their rank.
Even if it means challenging the captain.
Exactly. And CRM training also emphasizes shared situational awareness. Everyone needs to know what's going on, what the plan is, and what the risks are.
So everyone's on the same page.
Right. And it teaches pilots how to recognize those human factors that we talked about: stress, fatigue, complacency, overconfidence.
Knowing yourself, your limitations.
Exactly. It's not just about preventing accidents, it's about better communication and teamwork, which makes flying safer and smoother for everyone.
So CRM really changed pilot training from a technical focus to a more human focus.
Yeah, and the lessons from Flight 296 also influenced aircraft design and how we approach safety overall.
So this one incident really had a ripple effect throughout the entire industry.
Absolutely. For example, it made aircraft designers realize they needed to make systems that were more intuitive and less prone to pilot error. They started thinking about how to design things that would work with human limitations, not against them.
Making cockpits more pilot-friendly.
Exactly. And this led to all sorts of improvements: better cockpit displays, warning systems, and flight control laws that could prevent pilots from making mistakes.
And this focus on human factors in design is still going on today.
Oh yeah, especially with automation and more complex systems.
Makes sense. So Flight 296 also changed how we think about safety in general.
Yeah, it showed that we need to look at the whole system: the pilot, the aircraft, the environment, and how they all interact.
It's not just about checklists, it's about a culture of safety.
Right. Things like good communication, learning from mistakes, and always trying to improve. Flight 296 was a tragedy, but it made aviation safer.
So we've talked about the crash, the investigation, human factors, and how it all changed things. What are the big lessons we can learn from this incident?
Okay, well, first, preparation is key. Having a clear plan, understanding the situation, and making sure everyone's on the same page, no matter how experienced you are.
Don't get complacent.
Exactly. And communication is critical. Being open and clear, especially when things go wrong, everyone needs to be comfortable speaking up.
Even if it means questioning the captain.
Exactly. And we have to remember that technology has limits. Even with features like fly-by-wire, human error can still happen. We need to understand the systems we're using and how our choices can affect things.
And finally, we need to keep learning and improving. Always.
Absolutely. Aviation is always changing, and we need to learn from mistakes and keep getting better. That's how we make flying safer for everyone.
It's crazy how, one incident from so long ago can still be so relevant today.
Yeah.
Especially as we talk about all this automation and autonomous systems. Makes you wonder if are we just setting ourselves up for the same problems with fancier technology?
Right. Are we becoming too reliant on technology?
Exactly.
And maybe overlooking those human factors that led to things like Flight 296.
Yeah. I mean, we all love cool gadgets, and all the advancements in aviation are amazing.
Of course.
But are we losing sight of the basics?
Fundamental.
Like solid airmanship, sharp decision-making.
Yeah.
And that gut feeling that tells you something's not right.
You're absolutely right. It's not about rejecting technology.
Right.
It's about finding the right balance. How can we use all this automation, but still keep those core piloting skills and that human element of judgment?
That's so important. It's like you could have the most advanced autopilot.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how to fly the plane manually, what happens when the system fails?
You're in trouble. Big trouble. And it's not just about being able to fly manually.
Right.
It's also about really understanding those automated systems, their limitations, how they interact with everything else.
Because like we saw in Flight 296, even when the technology is working perfectly,
Yep.
human decisions can still cause problems.
Absolutely.
So we need to be like tech-savvy pilots, not just knowing how to operate things, but really understanding them.
To anticipate issues.
Yeah, and knowing when to step in.
Exactly.
That makes sense. So CRM training,
Yeah.
that needs to evolve too, right?
Definitely. CRM has to incorporate all this new technology because now it's not just about the crew working together, it's about the crew and the systems working together.
So how do we make that integration safe and seamless?
Right. And it's not about replacing pilots with robots.
Right.
It's about humans and machines working together, each doing what they do best.
So we can let the automation handle the routine stuff, reduce workload, enhance safety.
But the pilot's always there, monitoring everything, ready to take over.
Okay, so this brings up another question.
What's that?
How do we design these systems to be more transparent? I mean, if the pilot doesn't understand what the system is doing,
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many safety features it has.
Absolutely. And that's a big focus in aviation research right now.
Yeah.
How to design those interfaces.
Right.
So they give clear feedback, anticipate what the pilot needs, and present information in a way that's easy to grasp, even under stress.
So we're designing these systems to be more human-centered.
Exactly. We're taking into account how pilots think and make decisions.
Because as we move toward autonomous systems, this is only going to become more important.
Absolutely. How do we build trust between the pilot and the machine?
Right.
How do we make sure the pilot feels confident that they understand what the system's doing?
Those are some big questions.
Huge. No matter how amazing our technology gets, humans are still a huge factor in safety.
We can't forget that.
We can't become complacent or rely only on automation.
Or forget the lessons we've learned.
Right.
Aviation is so complex, and safety is an ongoing thing. Well, I think that's about it for our deep dive into Air France Flight 296.